Hello and welcome to episode 11 of Lex Out Loud, world building for science fiction. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker. I'm working on my third novel, my first science fiction novel, and I'm taking you along with me for the ride. In season 1, I'm exploring world building in depth. All right, so I know last week I said that this week I would give an update on the setting. I'm going to put that off until next week. I had something else come up that I wanted to talk about today, and it seems like every time I tell you what I'm going to do the next week, I end up doing something different. So maybe I should stop doing that. But today I'm going to talk about bringing your setting to life. So whether you're a writer or a game master, your job becomes a lot easier once your setting comes to life in your mind. You're able to much more easily improvise new setting elements on the fly that fit into your overall concept. So today I'll share how I found visualization to be a key skill to help you develop your setting and know when it's ready to go. Real quickly, before we jump into that discussion, though, I want to let you know that I am planning in the near future to do a sort of 20 questions episode about my setting. I've been talking about it through this show, but I'm afraid that my discussions of it have been pretty scattershot and hasn't been a real organized, here's everything you need to know about the setting kind of thing. So I'm concerned that there may be things that I haven't talked about or things that I glossed over that people don't know about or don't understand or are wondering about. So I thought a fun way to hopefully address that and fill in any cracks or gaps that I've left in talking about the setting is to do a kind of 20 questions episode. So I'm asking you all to send me any questions that you have about the setting that I'm developing, and I'll pick the best ones, and I'll do an episode, and I'll answer those questions for you. So you could give me those questions in our Discord community, or if you don't use Discord, you could shoot them to me in an email at lexoutloudpodcast@gmail.com. Really just anything regarding the setting I'm developing that you're curious about, that you'd like to know about, that I haven't covered. Really anything's fair game. And so, yeah, if you have any questions about the setting, please let me know, and I'll get those together and answer those in a future episode. I thought I'd talk a bit today about visualization as it applies to bringing your setting to life. I've listened to a lot of gaming and writing podcasts through the years. I've read lots of blogs, watched lots of YouTube videos, read books on writing and game mastering, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is a topic that I don't really recall hearing discussed before, or even if I've heard it discussed before, I haven't heard much said about it before. So I'm not sure why that is. Maybe I have heard those discussions and I've just forgotten about them. Maybe it's just one of those things that's just super obvious to everyone, so there's really no need to talk about it. Or maybe it's just something that's fallen through the cracks that for some reason no one's really thought to talk about, or at least no one that I've come across has thought to talk about. So I don't know. So this could be just me going on about something that's super obvious to everyone and isn't terribly helpful. Or maybe possibly is something you haven't thought about before. Maybe it's something you do, but you haven't really thought about it. Or maybe you don't even do this. Maybe you do things very differently from the way that I do. I don't know. I guess we'll find out through the response to this episode. But, this is an interesting thing. I've actually been thinking about talking about this on the show for a couple months now. And it's an interesting topic. Like I said, I haven't heard it talked about much, if at all. And I think it's interesting. And I do think it might be one of those things that to a lot of people is super obvious, to the point where we don't feel the need to even talk about it to people. but it may not be something that's obvious to everyone. So I'm hoping that it's a worthwhile thing to talk about. And this is an area where I've had the exact same experience as a writer and as a game master running tabletop role-playing games. I've had the exact same observations in both roles. So I know I said a lot on the show that I see a lot of similarities between being a writer and being a GM. And this is one of those areas where not only are they similar, I feel like they're exactly the same. So whether I'm writing a story or I'm running an RPG campaign, I found that there is a very specific moment for me where I suddenly feel ready to write the book or I feel ready to run the campaign. And the best way to kind of just put that moment to encapsulate it in a nutshell is to say it's the moment when the setting comes alive for me. But what do I mean by that? What does that mean when I say my setting comes alive? Like, what does that really mean? And again, I found that this applies equally to gaming and writing. But to try to explain what I'm saying here, I'm going to start with a gaming example. So when I start GMing, or when I started GMing for the latest version of Dungeons and Dragons, which is 5th edition, I decided to create my own setting to run the game in. I decided to create my own world. So I created my new fantasy world that I called Primordia to run all my D&D games in, to be the setting that these adventures take place in. And I talked a lot about Primordia and the process of creating it in my podcast, Game Master's Journey. So if you're interested in that, feel free to check that out. I'll go ahead and link in the show notes for this show. I'll go ahead and link a list I have of all of the world building episodes of Game Master's Journey with links, because there's over 280 episodes of Game Master's Journey. So if you haven't listened to that show, but you'd like to check out the world building content specifically, I have put together a list of all of the episodes that talked about world building, and you can go check those out if you like. Again, it was a fantasy setting, so especially if you're more of a fantasy writer, you might really enjoy that, because a lot of the world building I talk about on this show is more from a science fiction perspective. I mean, a lot of ways world building is world building, but I do totally understand if you're writing a fantasy that world building specifically about fantasy is probably a more interesting discussion to you than one that's couched in science fiction. So yeah, if that sounds interesting, you can go check those out. I'll have a link in the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com/LOL. So as with any kind of world building, I think, whether you're building for a story or a game or whatever you're doing, world building for an RPG never really ends. There's not really an end point. You're never really done. There's always more you can do. There's always more that you can know about the setting. There are more things you can flesh out, things you can expand, et cetera, et cetera. And no matter how much world building you do as a GM, the players are always going to do things that you didn't expect, or they're going to ask you questions that you didn't plan for, that you don't have a pre-thought answer for. And this is going to lead to aspects of the world that you just haven't developed yet, that you haven't thought about yet. So when that happens as a GM, you often have to just come up with something, come up with those details they're asking for on the fly during gameplay. And then later, when the game is over, you then add those new details you came up with to your notes about your setting. If you're lucky or skilled or both, you can time the end of a gaming session so that you can come up with those new details between the sessions, so you don't have to do it on the fly. And then you can provide that information at the beginning of the next session. So again, world building is really never done. But whether you're a GM or a writer, you do need to, at some point, start either running the game or writing the story that you're wanting to write. You know, you can't just world build forever. Eventually, you got to do the thing that you're world building for, whether that's running a game or writing a story. So a common question new world building GMs will have is, when do I know my setting is developed enough to start running the game? Or how do I know my setting is developed enough to start running the game? How will I know when the setting is, quote, ready for the players to start interacting with? Or again, from the writing perspective, how do I know when my setting's developed enough I can start writing my story? So there are a lot of ways you could probably answer that question. But my simplest answer to that is, you're ready to start running games in your world, or you're ready to start running your story when the world, quote, comes alive to you. So what it means to me when my world has come to life is that I've reached a point where I know the world very well. I'm not saying that I know every little detail about it, far from it. I'm not even saying that I think I know everything that I'll need to know to deal with whatever the players throw at me, or to deal with wherever my story goes. I'm not saying that at all. I don't know all those details yet. And I don't think I've ever gotten to the point with a setting, whether it's a setting I'm using for a story or a setting I'm using for a game, where I know all that. I've never gotten there, because you never know what the players will do in a game. And after over 20 years of running games, players still surprise me on a regular basis with what they decide to do. They always do things that I don't expect. So more what I mean when I say the world has come to life is that I have a good enough intuitive grasp of the setting that I'm confident that any answers I don't know, I'll be able to come up with those pretty much instantaneously once I need them. And that those answers will be answers that I'll be happy with later when the game session is over and I have time to think about it. So I think what this really means is that I've internalized the main ideas and the concepts, the high concepts and the major themes of my setting. So I think a great metaphor to use for this is, if you think about a lot of video games that have the fog of war mechanic. A lot of video games have this now, where as part of this game, you're exploring a world, and the areas that you haven't been to yet that are unexplored are fogged over. You can't actually see what's there on the map. You can only clearly see the areas that you've explored, and that's commonly called the fog of war, that obscured area that you can't see. So the areas that you haven't explored yet in the world in one of these video games are obscured. And then the unobscured areas that you can see represent where you've been in the game. So to bring this metaphor to world building, it's the same kind of thing, right? The unfogged area are the aspects of the setting that you've nailed down, that you've defined. And then the fog of war is everything else. So if the players, quote, go off the map and go into an area that's fogged over, an area that you haven't thought about yet or you haven't developed yet, at that point, you don't know exactly what's there because you haven't come up with it yet. But you know the setting well enough, you know the ideas and the concepts that your setting is built upon, and you know your ideas that you have for the future of the setting, where it's going, any ideas you might have about those unexplored areas, etc. You have enough of that kind of knowledge, that kind of overarching understanding of your setting, that you have an instant intuitive feeling of what might be there in that unexplored area, enough that you can easily come up with something on the fly during play if we're talking about a game. So I know this is kind of a hard thing to explain, and I'm not sure how good of a job I'm doing of explaining it, but the proof is in the pudding, as I like to say. So here's how to know when you're at that point. If you're with me on this, if you've had these realizations yourself, then you already probably know for yourself how you know when you're at that point where the settings come alive. But if you're new to this, or this is a new idea, you might be wondering, well, how do I know? How do I know when it's come alive for me? So let's say I'm running a D&D game in my homebrewed world of Primordia. And in this given game session, the players have gone, quote, off the map, which is to say they've gone to an area that I have not developed yet. So let's say they go off of the defined part of my map that I've worked on, and they're off in the fog of war area, and they decide that they want to look for some kind of settlement where they can go to resupply, buy stuff, sell stuff, that kind of thing. So I decide that they'll find a small village that's in the area. Now, at this moment, I have no idea what this village is. I haven't ever thought of it before. I don't know anything about it other than a rough idea of the population, just based on the fact that I just now decided to classify it as a village. So at least in Dungeons and Dragons, a village is a classification that designates a certain range of population. So a village is bigger than a hamlet, but it's smaller than a town. So at this point, that's all I know is it's a village. That's all I know. But if my setting has come alive to me, then I will have all kinds of ideas popping into my head about this village right away. For instance, I might have some ideas of the country it's located in. So even though this is an undefined area of my map, I may have already had some thoughts about what kind of nation is over there. And I might have some ideas about that. And if so, then that will help inform my village that I've just created. Or maybe the village isn't part of a larger nation. Maybe it's just an isolated village all by itself that isn't part of any larger political structure. But either way, whether it's part of some other country or not, that will lead me to some basic ideas of what some cultural elements of the village could be. Things like the food produced there, which tells me the kind of crops they grow, what animals they raise, what kind of dishes, what kind of foods one would find served at the local inn, things like that. Another aspect that can inform this is just geography, right? Like it might be fog of war, but I know, oh, this area is grasslands, or it's a forest, or it's forested hills, or it's mountainous, or whatever. But even if I just have a general idea of the terrain, then that will inform, what kind of animals you would find there, what would be good animals to raise in that kind of environment, what kind of plants could be gathered there. Is this an area suitable to farming? And if so, perhaps maybe what kind of crops might be grown there, especially if it's adjacent to an area that I fleshed out more. So, if I have another village or town that's not super far away from there that I have fleshed out, and if it's a similar landscape, similar geography, then, I can assume that they have some of the same similar things as far as the crops that they grow, the animals that they raise, the foods that they make, things like that. This could even lead me to things like the kind of clothing that they have. For instance, a village I did define in Primordia was the village of Dianara's Rest. And in that village, they raised alpacas. So among other things, I knew that they would use a lot of alpaca wool in their clothing. And I also knew that would be a major export for them as far as trade. So this kind of thing can work with anything, really. Maybe you're running a game in a city and you know that there's a thieves guild in your city, but you haven't really developed it all yet. And suddenly a player wants to go check out the thieves guild. If your setting has come to life in your mind, you'll probably have a pretty easy time coming up with some details on this guild just off the top of your head, at least enough to get you through the rest of that one game session until you have time to flesh it out more. So as a GM, I'd say a great way to know if your setting has come to life is to look at how comfortable you are improvising within the setting. When the players throw you a curveball that requires you to come up with something about the setting on the fly during play, how comfortable are you doing that? How easy or difficult is that? Do you find ideas just come to you naturally and it's super easy to just wing it? That's a good sign that your setting has come to life for you. If on the other hand, you're consistently stumped and you don't know what to do, then that's a sign that maybe you need to flesh things out a bit more on your setting. Now, as a writer, I know my settings come to life when I can just write scenes and not have to constantly stop to do research or figure things out. even if I come upon details I hadn't thought of before or defined before, I can quickly come up with those details without losing my flow of writing, just kind of on the fly. So this is probably all a little pedantic. Once you get to this point, whether you're a GM or a writer, you're most likely going to know it, and you don't need this necessarily to let you know that. But just in the hopes of communicating this and making this clear to everyone, I thought I would really try to kind of suss out what does this mean when I say the settings come alive, and what are some ways I can know whether or not I'm at that point. So again, as a GM, if I'm frequently stumped by what the players do or ask me, then I might need to put some more work into my setting. As a writer, if I'm frequently derailed in my writing by having to go off and do research on things, or just go off and think about things and figure out how things would go, then I may need to work on the setting and in the background some more. So this intuitive understanding that we develop is really an understanding of the big picture ideas of the setting. What makes this setting exciting and or important to you? What do you like about it? What are your favorite things about the setting? What makes the setting different from other similar settings? So if we're talking a fantasy setting for D&D, how is this different from other fantasy settings? What sets it apart? What makes it unique? What are the themes of the setting? If you've realized those yet, what are those themes? What is the tone of the setting? Are you going for a really grim and dark tone, or are you wanting something more lighthearted? Or are you wanting something hopeful and inspiring? Something dystopian? Those kinds of things. What kind of themes are you trying to bring out through your setting? Or another way to look at it, or what are the themes that just exist in your setting? Because, theme is its own topic. But I think more often than someone sets out to create something with a specific theme, I think it's more common that we create something and then we later realize that there are inherent themes within it. And then we either work to bring those themes out more, or maybe we change them if we don't like the themes that seem to be cropping up. So the more you grasp and internalize these kinds of overarching concepts about your setting, the more the small details will just come to you, seemingly without any effort or thought when you need them. So the best way I know of personally to see whether my setting is ready, whether that's to run a game in it or to write a story about it, is through visualization. So this is the part that I have not heard discussed. This is the thing that I haven't really heard talked about a whole lot, and is the thing that may just be so obvious that most people don't feel the need to talk about it. But visualization is really important, and it's a skill. So I think it would be remiss. It would not be a good thing to gloss over visualization and not talk about it at all, because although maybe it's just assumed that any kind of creative is using visualization, whether you're a writer or a game master or whatever, even if that is the case, that it's just assumed that everybody's doing that, that doesn't mean that everybody knows how to do that, or that everybody's great at doing that, or that we can't get better at doing it. So, okay, hopefully now at this point, we're all on the same page as far as what are we talking about when we say the setting has come to life? What do we mean by that? And some ideas of knowing whether you're there or not. So now the question is, how do we get there? Okay, let's say I'm working on my setting and I'm not there yet. Let's say I don't feel like it's come to life yet. How can I kind of facilitate that process? How can I get to that point where it comes to life and I can just start coming up with stuff on the fly, seemingly effortlessly? I think a big part of this, of course, is just doing the work, laying the foundation for your setting. That's going to get you most of the way there. It might even get you all the way there, depending who you are and how your mind works and how you do what you do. So define as much as you can. Focus on things you think are the most important. So for instance, in my setting for my novel that I'm working on, this mundane science fiction novel, I focused a lot on the settling of the solar system. I know a big feature of the setting is that there are human settlements beyond just Earth in places like Earth orbit, the moon, Mars, the asteroid belt, and so on. So I've done a lot of research into the various possibilities for settlement in the solar system. Where are places that we would want to settle? Which places are easier to settle? Which are more difficult? What are the benefits possibly of each different place we might go? And I've done all of this to get a mental picture of how this will look. Where will we go first? Where will we go second and third and fourth and so on? Which places will be settled in which order? So I planned for the first novel to be set within a rotating cylindrical orbital city on top of a space elevator here on Earth. So I've done a lot of research into orbital habitats, space elevators, things like that. Now, since this is a setting I've been mulling over in my mind for over a decade now, a big part of the world building for me recently has been just writing all my ideas down, getting them down in one place, organizing them, deciding which ideas to keep, which to get rid of, which to expand upon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So doing your groundwork is really important. You got to do that first. And I feel like that's, going to get you 90+% of the way there. But at least in my experience, it does not get you the whole way. It'll get you 90+%, but that extra 1 or 2%, the linchpin that's missing here, at least for me, comes through visualization. I find visualizing my setting to be incredibly helpful, both in helping me know if the setting is developed enough or not, is it ready? And also in helping me to, quote, get to know the setting, to get to that level of intuitive understanding where I can improvise in the setting on the fly easily. So this is one of those things that I imagine and assume that we all do as writers and GMs. But again, I don't hear it talked about much. And I mean literally visualizing here. I sit down or lie down, close my eyes, and visualize, imagine the setting. So for example, with my current setting I'm working on, one of the first things I started visualizing were these cylindrical orbital cities. I imagined what one would look like with the space elevator coming out of the bottom, stretching down to Earth far below. I could see the thing rotating. I visualized it from the outside, imagine flying around it, looking at it from different angles, trying to get a real feel for the size and the scale of the thing. I remember that being a big thing when I first started visualizing these things, is I was trying to wrap my brain around how big they really are. And I just imagined, coming at it from a distance, and as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and I'm craning my neck back to like look up at the thing and try to see all of it. And I just tried to imagine that as vividly as I could. Once I felt I had a grasp on the exterior, I started thinking about what the inside would look like. I visualized the corridors, the large open spaces, the command and control center, things like that. I remember, and I'll get to this more, I think, in a minute, but once I started actually writing, I approach this on a scene by scene basis. So I'm visualizing places where I imagine scenes in the story will take place, because those are the places I really want to be able to see with my mind's eye. So I remember one of the first ideas I had, just as kind of like almost like a pre-writing exercise, what was I mentioned way back in the show, I mentioned one of my ideas was that my main character recently lost her eyesight and had cybernetic eyes implanted. And so I was just imagining the scene of her in an elevator within one of these cities after just having had the surgery. And she's in the elevator seeing with these cybernetic eyes for the first time. And very simple scene. I mean, this might be a sentence or less of prose in the actual book, but I spent a lot of time just imagining being in this elevator, what the elevator looks like in as much detail as I could. So once I'm actually writing the book, once I start actually writing, like I said, I do this with every scene that I write. I imagine and visualize the scene in my mind. I watch it play out over and over. I quote, see it in my mind as vividly as I can. And every time I play the scene back, I try to see it in more detail than the time before. I try to always add more details, which is not to say I'm going to describe all those in the book. Of course not. But the more I see, the better my eventual description will be, even if that description isn't going to detail every little thing that I'm seeing. This also helps me work out the dialogue of the scene and the beats of action that will happen. It helps me to think about the environment that the scene takes place in, how the characters might interact with the various aspects of the environment during the scene, and how I might describe that. So I want to point out here that although I keep using the word visualize, I'm actually involving as many of my senses as possible. This isn't just a vision thing. It's just easiest to use the word visualize. And I don't know that we really have great words like visualize for all of the other senses. So just keep in mind, whenever I say visualize, I'm meaning more than just vision. What does the thing look like? So in addition to picturing things, for example, the inside of an elevator, I also quote visualize with my other senses as well. So what does the air in the elevator smell like? What temperature is it? Is it cool? Is it warm? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is there a taste in the air, which is closely connected with the smell, of course? What are the sounds that I hear as I'm in this elevator? Is there music playing? If so, what kind of music is it? What do the surfaces in the elevator feel like? For instance, if there's a touchpad or a touch screen or buttons, what do those feel like? Are they plastic? Are they metal? Are they cool? Are they warm? Are they smooth? Are they rough? Things like that. As much as you can pull into this, as many senses as you can, because again, you do the same thing when you write a good description, right? A good description will use more than just vision. It'll pull in other senses too. So yeah, the better quote image you have in your mind to kind of hold in your mind when you go to write your description, the better your description is going to be, even if you're describing 1% of what you're picturing, which is probably going to be the case, because you don't want to write a 3-page description of an elevator because no one wants to read that. So I find the more of this kind of visualizing I do before I start writing a scene, the easier that scene is to write and the less time it takes me. And the more it just kind of flows and I just write the thing in one go and I'm good. I find when I find myself agonizing over a scene or wondering how to word something or how to describe something or how to, what order things happen in, usually when I'm having those kinds of issues, I just need to visualize the scene better. And usually at that point, I'll stop writing and sit back and close my eyes, visualize the scene, play it over until I can see it really well. And then it becomes easy to write it again. I'll often start by visualizing the place where the scene takes place first. Once I have the setting of the scene really solid in my mind, where I can just close my eyes and see it, then I start thinking about the characters that are there, picture them, what do they look like? Again, involving as many senses as I can. I think about the dialogue and the action that's going to happen during the scene and how all that plays out. And I play it back and forth in my mind like a movie. And I do this with literally every element of the setting. Or of the story. I'm sorry. I do it with every element of the story. So I'll visualize characters, objects, pieces of technology, ships, etc. Anything that's in the story that I'm going to mention or describe, I picture it first. I aim to be able to see the thing, whatever it is, vividly in my mind before I even start writing about it. I find that when I visualize the setting, the characters, and the scene ahead of time, when I go to write it, it just flows. The words just come out. It seems like there's no effort involved. I basically have a movie of the scene playing in my head at this point that I can just watch, which I do. I watch it over and over as I'm writing the scene. Now that I've got this movie playing, my task is really simple. I just watch the movie and then write down what I see. And since I've already got the scene solid in my mind, I'm not thinking about what so-and-so going to say next or what so-and-so going to do or what's going to do what's going to happen next? What's going to do next? What's going to happen next? I already know all that. So instead, I can just watch the movie and focus on how am I going to communicate this? What's the best way to describe what's happening? How can I get this across the most clearly and the most vividly and evocatively using language? So depending on who you are, your natural proclivities and your experiences and how much of this kind of thing you've done in the past, visualizing may be really easy for you, or you may find it difficult. But luckily, it is a skill that you can develop, which means no matter how easy or difficult you find it, you can improve, you can get better, it can become easier. The more you do it, the better you'll get at it, and the easier and more natural it will seem to you. So visualization is often used in various forms of meditation, and that's how I was kind of introduced to it, and that's how I honed my skill with it personally. I think I've definitely honed it more as a writer, but I started out with a pretty good ability to visualize just from various meditation exercises that I've done in the past. So I'm going to go ahead and share a couple exercises with you that I've done and still do sometimes that will help you practice visualizing and help you improve the skill. Now, I didn't come up with either one of these, and I can't even really tell you where I got these from. So I'm not claiming to have come up with these exercises. I'd love to give you a source for them, but first of all, I think they're fairly common exercises. I think for both of these, you could find numerous sources probably that claim to have come up with the idea. The same idea could have been derived independently in various places and times because they're very simple, straightforward kinds of things that different people could have easily come up with by themselves. So I did not invent this. I don't know who did, but that's okay. We can still benefit from the exercises. These are really simple. You can really do these anywhere. Although if you do it in public, people might look at you funny. So, okay, the first one is visualizing an orange. So for this exercise, just get comfortable, close your eyes. You can sit, you can lay down, doesn't matter. I don't care what you do. You just want to be comfortable so you can focus on what you're focusing on and not be distracted by being uncomfortable. So close your eyes and imagine an orange, the fruit. Hopefully everyone's familiar with oranges. So imagine an orange, picture it in your mind. And the goal is to be able to see the orange in your mind's eye as clearly as if you were looking at a real orange with your real eyes. So just start out, close your eyes and just picture an orange. If you need to, or it helps you, to have an actual orange to look at first, go for it. It doesn't matter, whatever you want to do. So imagine this orange in your mind, picture it in as much detail as you can. Also, again, you want to involve all of your senses. So imagine, first start with the easy one, vision, imagine the color of it, what it looks like, the lighting on it, that kind of stuff. Then imagine you're holding the orange in your hand, feel the weight of it in your hand, feel the texture of the orange's skin under your fingers. Imagine lifting the orange to your nose and smelling it. Now imagine you're peeling the orange and visualize that whole process of peeling it as vividly as you can. And again, using the senses as much as you can. So you can imagine the scent of the orange heightening as you cut it open. You can imagine the juice squirting out of the orange as you're peeling it. You can smell the juice. Maybe some of it hits your face. You can feel the little squirt of juice hit your face. Once you have the orange peeled, you can section it and imagine eating a piece and try to taste the orange in as much detail as you can. Imagine the taste and the texture of the orange in your mouth as you chew it. And that's it. That's the exercise. You're just visualizing this orange as vividly as you can. And obviously you could extend this to all kinds of other objects if you get bored with an orange. An orange is just nice because it is something that you can see, you can smell, you can taste. It has a texture and it's something we're all familiar with. So yeah, so that's that one. Really simple. The other visualization exercise I have for you to hone this skill is to simply visualize a room. So this is even easier to describe than the last one. So just get comfortable in a room or some other setting. You could do this anywhere, really. You could do it outside or at a park or in an airport, whatever, wherever you want. Sit in your room of choice or your setting. And first, you just want to observe the room. Now, especially if you're new to this or just a beginner, start with something easy. Start with a room that you're already really familiar with, like your bedroom or maybe your living room, or just a room that you know very well, that you're very familiar with, that you spend a lot of time in. So that would be my recommendation. Start out with something easier. Start with a room that you're super familiar with. And first, just look around the room. Just take note of the features of the room, the objects in the room, where they are, what's on this shelf, what's on that shelf, that kind of thing. Now, what you do is you just close your eyes and picture the room in your mind's eye in as much detail as you can. Try to remember, if you've got bookshelves in your room, which books are on what shelves, or if you've got knickknacks on different shelves, what knickknacks are on what shelves. What's the carpet look like? What's the wallpaper look like? As many details as you can. And then when you can't come up with anything else and you remember everything you can, then open your eyes, check your work, see how you did, look around the room again, see what you missed. And you can keep doing this over time and you'll get better and better at it. And as you get, maybe you start out in your bedroom and you get to where you can just instantly picture your bedroom in every detail. Then you can move to another room. And once so you start getting better at this, you can go somewhere that you're not familiar with, somewhere outside of your house. Again, somewhere where you can do this without people looking at you strangely. But yeah, go somewhere that you're unfamiliar with and try it there and see how you do. And that's it. Really, really simple. But, like so many things in life, visualizing is, it's like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. And the more you can do with it and the easier it is to do things with it. But it may be, if this is a muscle that you haven't used a lot before, it may be, challenging in the beginning. But if you keep at it, you'll see improvement. And it doesn't take a long time. I'm sure everybody's experience is different, but I think within a few times of doing either of these exercises, you'll find it gets easier and you do better at it. And then the real test, of course, is to turn to your story you're writing or your game you're running, your setting you're developing, and try out your new visualization muscles there. Try to visualize a place, a setting. And again, start small and work your way up. A great thing to visualize is a character. So if you're writing a book or a story, visualize your main character. Or if you're running a RPG, visualize an NPC that the player characters interact with a lot, like their group patron or the innkeeper at the inn where they stay or something like that. And visualize that character in as much detail as you can and keep adding details until it's vivid to you and the character kind of comes alive to you. And then with that image in your mind, write a good description of that character in like a sentence. Other great things are discrete places. So if you're running, say, a D&D game, again, and your player characters stay at an inn, visualize the common room of the inn. Where is the bar in the room? Is it on the back wall across from the door where you enter? Is it to the left wall, the right wall? What kind of bar is it? How high up is it on a someone of X height? What material is it made out of? Is it made out of wood? What kind of wood? Is the wood kind of rough hewn and just sanded and varnished, or is it made out of formed boards? Is it made out of stone? Maybe. What do the tables in the inn look like? Do they all match one another? Are they all disparate? Are they all different? Is there a fireplace? How big is the fireplace? Is it a huge fireplace you could walk inside of, or is it a smaller fireplace? Is there more than one fireplace? Where is the entrance to the kitchen? If there are stairs that go up to the rooms of the inn, where are those located? Just visualize that as much as you can. What smells are in the air? What's cooking in the kitchen right now? What do you smell when you enter this room? Yeah, or if you're writing a story, think about your first scene you're going to write or the next scene you're going to write, and do it with that location. Visualize that in as much detail as you can. And then once you get that image nice and solid in your mind, then go ahead and try to write a good evocative description using as few words as possible. Just a sentence, 2 sentences tops. Tell us, 2 or 3 interesting things about this. Involve as many senses as you can without, getting ridiculous. And yeah, just see where it takes you. So there you go. There are my thoughts on bringing your setting to life using visualization. Like I said, this could be super obvious to you, or maybe it's a eureka moment for you. I hope, at least for someone out there, it's a eureka moment. That would be great. At the very least, I hope that it's not super obvious to everyone and I didn't waste everyone's time. But I would love to hear from you what you think about this. Is this what you do? Or are you hearing a lot of things that sound very familiar to you? Or does this seem alien and strange to you? And if it does seem alien and strange, how do you do this? How do you imagine something to describe it? How do you flesh out your setting to the point where you're comfortable with it and you feel like you know it really well? I'd love to hear from you. And if you do visualize in a similar way that I do, and you have any tips or tricks or maybe exercises you use or anything like that you'd like to share, let me know. I'd be happy to pass that on to the other listeners, because I'm far from an expert on this topic. So, you may have some great ideas that I didn't share today, and I'd love to share those with everyone else. So yeah, let me know. So you can email me at lexoutloudpodcast@gmail.com, or you could shoot me a message in our Discord server. Again, everyone can join the Discord server. You don't have to be a patron or anything to join the Discord. However, there is a special writer's room just for the patrons. So you can check that out if you're interested in that and you'd like to support the show. Another great way to keep up on me is to follow me on Twitter at LexStarWalker. Also, I tend to tweet interesting to me space and technology related news. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, you can follow me on Twitter and see some of what's going on if you don't have a ton of time to peruse that kind of stuff yourself. And finally, you can call my voicemail if you'd like to leave a message, whether that's a comment or tell me how you visualize your settings, or if you have a suggestion for an episode or a question, anything like that. I'd love to hear from you. And again, that number is 951-465-5391. And it's just a voicemail. You can just leave me a message and you might even hear your message on the show. So again, that phone number is 951-465-5391. So thank you very much for your attention today. And I hope this was illuminating and helpful, at least somewhat. And yeah, I really hope I hear from you how you will go about this, how you bring your settings to life, whether you're a game master or a writer, and any tips or tricks you might have for facilitating that. I'd love to hear from you. So I will be back next week. Again, I'm planning to talk more about my setting and kind of give you the lowdown on where I'm at in developing the setting right now. So unless I change my mind again, that's what I'm planning to do next week. But regardless, we'll talk about something interesting for episode 12. So I will see you then. And until then, keep writing.